So there's this guy. I came across this guy's. He has a YouTube channel, Dr. Zuban Damania, and he's hosts the ZDogg MD show, but he doesn't give any other of his credentials, but he has them. And so he did a whole video about your appearance on Joe Rogan, and he starts to, the premise is that you're full of misinformation and bias, and he's going to show it. Well, as I started to watch it, I started to be able to see right through a lot of the things he was saying, and I'm a moron. So, medically, I don't have anything. So here, I'll play some of it, and I'll show you. So here, let's go. Let's start.
Well, can we have the tools to actually understand what's information here, what's misinformation, what's bias, what's not? Well, the first thing you have to go.
Now, I have his video sped up, so it sounds a little fast, just so you know you're not freaking out. Okay.
Is a list of basic things that can recognize when information is either biased or misinformation or there's science denialism, whatever it is. And these are those things. Okay. The first is an idea that there's a conspiracy. So this idea that there's some nefarious process to stifle the truth, that there's a persecuted minority that's fighting for the truth, and that this is all a coordinated effort to hide something by powers that be or profit motivated interest. Now, why is that a problem? Well, because you shouldn't ever have to rely on that if you have actual science data and reason to support your viewpoint. You should not have to appeal to conspiracy. So that's one sign, okay?
Okay, so he's saying anybody who thinks that there was any kind of conspiracy around COVID and the way the COVID policy was laid out. And let's remember what a conspiracy is. A conspiracy is one person working with another person to do something. That's all it is. More than one person working together to do something. Now, we know for a fact that Dr. Fauci and the head of the NIH, Dr. Collins, conspired to smear the authors of the Great Barrington Declaration. So there's one conspiracy happening at the tippity top of the American Medical Association right here that I know about. And so this guy is trying to pretend that if you acknowledge that, you're crazy. Well, this guy, this is the first thing he said in his video, and I'm like, oh, I think this guy might be full of shit because I can see through him. Now,
Jimmy, let me just say that, we started at the outset, I have over 650 peer-reviewed publications in the National Library of Medicine. Each one of these is like a PhD thesis. I've looked at a ton of data. This doctor doesn't have any of that. So he just hasn't looked at evidence or data to the extent I have to even opine on anything. So he needs about, 30 years of experience. He's got to start working pretty fast now to try to catch up to some level of competence with data. And, it's clear. When I was on Rogan, everything was cited. So when I got to this part, I cited Peter Breggin and Ginger Breggin's book, COVID-19 and the Global Predators, We Are the Prey. I wrote the introduction for the book. It is a work of nonfiction. So if you want to see the relationships between Moderna and the lab in Wuhan, China, it's in the book with the evidence. If you want to see the link between Moderna and the NIH, which co-owns the patent, there's a relationship. The NIH and University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, that was working on the gain of function research for the spike protein. So everything is evidence. And so you're right, it is planned, it is connected. And what he's doing is, I think, in a very unfair way, he's trying to discredit me. And I can tell you, I have not tried to discredit him. I didn't even know who he was until he kind of went on this tear. Someone said, would you debate him? I said, listen, I don't think he's U.S. Senate material. When I need somebody who actually has some credentials in evaluating evidence and understanding the science.
So I just wanted to, off the top of my head, when he said that, I could think of lots of conspiracies that surround COVID, meaning people in power working together to promote propaganda or a lie about something. That's what I'm talking about. And so, for instance, when I got injured by the vaccine, I was put into a trial, and one of the drugs they gave me in that trial was ivermectin. And I said to the doctor, I said, hey, isn't that horse poison? And he said, no, that's propaganda. And the reason why they're saying that is because if it turns out that ivermectin can treat COVID. They wouldn't be able to get emergency use authorization for those vaccines. And I said, but so what? Why wouldn't they just want ivermectin? Couldn't they make money off ivermectin? And he said, no, they can't, because it's off patent now. It's a generic and anybody could make it. So when I found out that they were lying at the top of their lungs about ivermectin, I started to look into other things. And everywhere I looked, it turned out they were lying. They were lying about masks. They were lying about herd immunity. They were lying about mandates. They were lying about ivermectin. They're lying about everything that I looked into. They were lying. And of course, if you say that, people will call you a Trumper, a right-winger, and a conspiracy theorist like this guy just did, who doesn't have the credentials to even go over this stuff. But I want to show him that I don't have the credentials either, but I know that he's full of shit, because ivermectin is on the WHO list of essential medicines. So where did that come from? Why did... and here's Zed Gilani, who's a great journalist, says, why is basically the entire media lying about what ivermectin is and calling it a horse drug? That's called a conspiracy. So how did that come about? You can't ignore that happened. That didn't not happen. And I'll show it to you. Here's rolling. Go ahead, doctor. Go ahead.
Yeah, Jimmy, I just wanted to say that, that data, that previous tweet was September 2nd. That was about the time that the American Medical Association launched an official campaign to abolish the use of ivermectin. Now, since when does the AMA, which is not a treatment group, which has no role in recommending or not recommending drugs, which is basically like a physician political professional association, why would they want to abolish the use of ivermectin? There's 70 supportive studies. Over 20 countries have government official guidelines recommending ivermectin. Nearly 36 medical societies across the world recommend ivermectin. So why would the AMA do that? The point I made, this is what I told Tucker Carlson, this is what I told Joe Rogan. I said the same entities that are working to suppress early treatment. So you would agree that's an obvious, overt attempt to suppress treatment. It is an overtly stated goal to abolish the use of ivermectin. The same entities are wildly promoting the vaccines every single time. So the pharmacies who are suppressing the distribution of early treatment are wildly promoting the vaccines. The AMA, the American College of Physicians, American College of Pediatrics, American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, the NIH, CDC, and FDA. Every single entity that has either put a chill on early treatment, said it doesn't work, said there isn't enough evidence, or they want to abolish early treatment, every single organization is wildly promoting the vaccines with no eye or intent of reporting safety and efficacy.
And so I just want to show him, because I know he'll see this video, because his video got over 700,000 views as of today. So it's obviously being promoted by Google and YouTube, which is the establishment, right? And so they put it in a nice algorithm, so it's going to get a lot of views. So a lot of people have seen his BS video, and I just want to let that guy know that a pothead comedian in his garage knows that there's a conspiracy around COVID. How did this happen? How did Rolling Stones put out a perfectly ridiculous article saying that people are going to the emergency rooms in Oklahoma because they're taking ivermectin, which was not true? Here it is. Gunshot victims left waiting as horse dewormer overdoses overwhelm Oklahoma hospitals. That wasn't true, but it was reported ubiquitously. Newsweek reported it. The Hill reported it. Daily News, New York Daily News reported it. Everybody reported it. Everybody. And guess what? They don't report this, though, that there's a widespread distribution of ivermectin proves effective in Mexico. Nobody in the United States knows this. They never promote that. So there is a conspiracy to suppress information about ivermectin and promote false information about ivermectin. And who else is in on it?
Jimmy,
the fucking FDA is in on it. Here's the FDA. You are not a horse. You are not a cow. So, and you know why they're doing that, Dr. Dog? They're doing that because they're captured by the big pharma, because they fund the FDA. You want to jump in?
Yeah, I wanted to say that, listen, you got the FDA, the Hill, the Rolling Stone, Newsweek. And that story about ivermectin overdoses, finally, an administrator in Oklahoma at a hospital had to come out and say, listen, there's no ivermectin overdoses. No one's overdosing. And the Trial Site News actually got the Poison Control Center data about people calling in for ivermectin. And it turns out they were calling in because they were just trying to clarify the dose, because the dose is in micrograms per kilogram of dose. And at the U.S. Senate testimony 2020, the same thing for hydroxychloroquine. When someone said poison control is overwhelmed with calls, people were just calling, is it 200 twice a day or 200 once a day? So the point is, listen, the first year of the pandemic, the goal was to suppress any use of hydroxychloroquine, and to the point of even publishing a false paper in Lancet and having the FDA essentially say, don't use hydroxychloroquine. The second year of the pandemic was trying to suppress the treatment of ivermectin to the greatest extent possible, despite its efficacy. Now we're in the third year of the pandemic, and guess what? One of our most useful drugs we've been using all year long, monoclonal antibodies, we're out of ammo. Nobody seems to know where they are, what have you. And so now the Pfizer drug, same thing. Today I had a patient. I said, she goes, it's so hard to find the Pfizer drug. We can't find it anywhere. So listen, Jimmy, this suppression of treatment is, I think, very intentional in order to promote vaccination.
There's no doubt that that's what's happening. You have to be a liar or someone who just had a stroke to not see that this is what's happening. And so I'm going to say that guy just had a stroke because I don't want to call him a liar, but I think he's a liar. And here is why is the FDA funded by the companies it regulates? And so just to show you more of the conspiracy, this is a guy who's got hundreds of thousands of followers on. He writes for The Intercept, which is billionaire funded. And the way he feels about it is vaccine should not be voluntary, but y'all aren't ready to have that conversation. So he's a maniac, and he writes for a billionaire-funded establishment news that's been suppressing any kind of information that isn't helpful to the Democratic Party, like the Hunter Biden laptop they said was Russian disinformation. So they suppressed it, which is censorship. And now they're spreading false information about ivermectin. I tweeted out on Twitter, this is a paper from the NIH, published at the NIH, use of ivermectin and associated with lower mortality in hospitalized patients with coronavirus disease. There it is. That's a paper. And I just posted it to Twitter, and he said Jimmy Dore is a Horsterwimmer med guy now. That's a journalist that's a celebrated journalist from a major freaking news outlet who's spreading ivermectin disinformation on purpose. He knows that's not what it is, but he did it anyway. So I want to ask that Dr. Dog, what conspiracy don't you see? How much don't you see? And here it is. Somebody said, if you want to argue the quality and accuracy of that research, that's one thing. But to blithely dismiss Jimmy Dore as a Horsterwimmer med guy when the drug exists in form safe for human use under medical supervision, isn't it? So that's what I'm talking about. Of course, there's been unbelievable suppression and demonization and discreditization of ivermectin, which was referred to as a wonder drug before COVID happened. They were looking at it to treat cancer, even after all the millions of lives it saved from river blindness. And now look at this. So here's the Daily Mail. This is right now, February 9th. South African doctor who discovered Omicron variant slams pressure from countries to make the virus sound worse than it actually is. There's are you kidding me? This is happening globally. Would you like to speak to this?
It's absolutely, everything you said is spot on. It's clear that there was a campaign the first year to basically discredit any use of hydroxychloroquine. In fact, criminalize it in Australia. The second year, it was about ivermectin. It turns out, fairly, with hydroxychloroquine, there's about a 25% treatment effect. And I published a meta-analysis on that with Joe Ladapo. With ivermectin, the treatment benefit's about 70%. The paper you showed by J.J. Roster, that's American data from Florida. Before the campaign, listen, it reduced mortality inpatient and outpatient. And I worked with Senator Johnson to have Roster testify in the U.S. Senate. Those data are good enough to be U.S. Senate record. And some blogger is trying to discredit. In the Chest is one of the best critical care journals that we have. So there has been a concerted effort to suppress safe and effective drugs. We use them in combination. By the way, we don't need any single one of these drugs, and that's been shown. We need about 4 to 6 drugs. We use them in combination, but there's no linchpin. Now the interesting thing is we're down to monoclonal antibodies, Pfizer and Moderna, and nobody knows where the drugs are.
So we're going to get to that. He brings this up. So hopefully we'll have enough time to get to that. Let's get to his next assertion.
Doctors early on didn't care about early treatment. They were more concerned about their own safety and PPE and personal protection. Okay. This is what emotionally triggered me when I was talking to Vinay.
So he said, you said that. I'll play it again. This is what he says you said on Joe Rogan.
Doctors early on didn't care about early treatment. They were more concerned about their own safety and PPE and personal protection. Okay. This is what emotionally triggered me when I was talking to Vinay Prasad on our VPZD podcast. This is not entirely true. In fact, it's quite false. Early on, there were huge groups of physicians across multinational situations getting together on social media and sharing ideas about therapeutics, whether it was, do we give steroids or not? Whether it was, do we give azithromycin antibiotics or not? Do we give blood thinners? That's all we can talk about. Do we give blood thinners or not? There seems to be this massive clotting thing with COVID. Do we ventilate them? Do we use non-invasive ventilation? Do we, how do we protect frontline clinicians because we didn't have enough PPE, right? So all of this was happening. I think it's very belittling the sacrifice of frontline healthcare professionals, many of whom were infected, some of whom did die. Many of whom did die, actually, early on, to make this claim because it's not accurate. So this is just simply an inaccurate claim. Now, you could argue that there was maybe not enough emphasis on early treatment, but what does that really mean, right?
I'll tell you what it means.
Preventing virus with early therapeutic treatment is very hard to do. HIV, we have to give multi-drug cocktails, like called PrEP, right, to prevent an infection, say. And once you're infected, you have to treat with these multi-drug cocktails forever. And it's effective enough to turn it into a chronic disease, but it's not great, right? We don't have great antivirals. And so the idea was, let's repurpose other drugs that do other things and see if that actually helps. But let's talk about it. So then he goes.
So you go ahead. Would you like to respond to that? Because I could, but I'll wait.
I was just telling him, I'm just reporting what was on the task force calls. I was on health system task force calls. I sat on them faithfully every week, and they were just discussing personal protective equipment week after week after week. And finally, I said, are we going to start treating patients? And that's what spurred me to work with the Italians. And the Italians did have some frontline healthcare workers die to publish the first paper on how to treat COVID-19. So if this guy thinks that a whole bunch of people was ahead of me, there wasn't a single paper in the peer-reviewed literature showing doctors how to use drugs in combination until I published the first paper in the American Journal of Medicine. I was the vanguard. So this claim that he's making that everybody had everything figured out and they tried all these drugs ahead of time, it's absolutely false. He's giving false information.
He's making that up. I know. Just for my own personal physician who was on the front line of treating COVID people in Pasadena, California, at the Huntington Hospital. She was, working 24 hours a day, treating them for months and months and months. And she was one of the leading doctors there. And she told me when I went to see her that nobody knows what they're doing and they're not giving them treatments. And I said, what do you mean they're not? She goes, well, I'm giving my patients steroids and I've been directed to not do that. She goes, there's a directive coming from outside the hospital to say not to give steroids. And she said, well, your patients are dying and I'm not going to let my patients die without trying something. So she would fill them with steroids, and her patients were living at a much higher rate than the other people's patients. So I know for a fact that they were suppressing steroids. I know for a fact that they were suppressing ivermectin. I know for a fact that they were suppressing hydroxychloroquine, and now they're suppressing monoclonals. That's happening. That's not made up. Everybody knows that. In fact, the government admits that they're limiting the monoclonals being delivered to red states. They've said that. And so this idea that we're making this up and you got to be crazy to think that's actually false. That guy is lying. I'll say it. He's a liar. I don't know who's paying him.
The other thing too is he tries to do this emotional play that, oh, I was insensitive to these doctors who are trying all these medicines. Listen, I was treating these patients. I testified in the Senate from the very beginning. I treated all my risk patients. I had one of the very first investigational new drug applications to actually use an oral therapeutic in COVID-19. I published the very first paper. This guy he's out to lunch. He's got the chronology all wrong. There wasn't an outpouring of effort to try to figure out these drugs.
There wasn't.
If there would have been 20 papers ahead.
That's right.
There were none. There were none.
But he does have a bald head, so he looks like he's authoritative, right? But he's not. Here we go.
To say, listen, I've been working with the American Academy of Physicians and Surgeons, which is an independent organization of physicians, and we released this early paper about the pathophysiological basis of hydroxychloroquine in stopping COVID. Okay, first of all, let's unpack this. AAPS. Now, and this is why do I care about this? Because you need to understand the bias.
So now he's going to go on and not discredit your work or anything you've said. He's not going to try to quibble with any of your science. He's just going to do an ad hominem smear on you. Watch this.
and where the person who's presenting information is coming from. I kind of told you my biases, right? I'm UCSF Stanford trained, like Peter McCullough, who was the vice chair of internal medicine at Baylor. I was the deputy chief of internal medicine at Stanford for a 2-year period. I know what that means. That means you go to meetings. You get elected and you go to meetings. That's all it means. But now you know kind of where we come from, right? I worked as a hospitalist for 10 years on the front lines treating patients. Now, when Peter McCullough says, I'm in AAPS is a conservative physician organization. So it has a clear political bias. It has political activities. And
so I only go to, I don't know about you, doctor, but I make sure I ask, before I go see a doctor, I go, are you a Democrat? Did you vote for Joe Biden? Because those are the only ones I like to listen to. I don't know about you. So that seems to be a weird criteria that he has, but here we go.
Past claims have been things like HIV doesn't cause AIDS. Gay-related behavior is what's shortening the lifespan of homosexuals. Abortions cause breast cancer, and other things along those lines. So that's the organization, right? They may do some good stuff, but they've also done that. So they have a clear political, moral, conservative, social bias. Fine, that's fine. But you got to understand that that's where he's coming from. So the pathophysiological basis of early COVID treatment, what that translates into, hey, here's some theoretical reasons based on physiology why hydroxychloroquine might help, right? Fine, but it doesn't say it works. It's not a randomized control trial saying hydroxychloroquine works. So the next claim is that
So do you want to stop there? You want to stop there? And
let me just say that training at UCSF and Stanford is good, but he only has 3 papers cited in the National Library of Medicine. I think they look like resident projects. He's not my equal. He's not. He's nowhere close. And you know what? I'm a member of many medical societies, many American College of Physicians and American College of Cardiology, National Lipid Association, and I'm the president of a major medical society, Cardiovascular Society of America. The reason why AAPS is important, Association of American Physicians and Surgeons, they were the only treatment organization, the only organization that said, you know what, we need to make a home treatment guide. This is so important. We've got to get information to patients on what they can do at home to treat COVID-19 to prevent hospitalization and death. And it didn't matter what their prior stance was on any illness. They were the only ones willing to step up.
Okay. Yep, we'll go some more.
Chloroquine in vitro reduced the original SARS's replication, and that the backlash against hydroxychloroquine wasn't about Trump at all. It was some other conspiracy because, mysteriously plants that made hydroxychloroquine were burned down even before Trump really embraced hydroxychloroquine. And it's like you're saying, okay, well, it's not politicized, not about politics. It's about a bigger conspiracy. Well, it's really hard to prove or disprove that, isn't it? Because again, you're appealing to conspiracy, which is one of the signs of not very clear thinking on the science. Then there's a claim about remdesivir.
So that's how he just dismisses it by saying that's just a conspiracy, and so I could get rid of it, even though we proved. People are charged with conspiracies in the criminal justice system every day. They were trying to find a conspiracy with Trump and Russia for 4 straight years. But they called it collusion because they've demonized the word conspiracy. So this guy to say, if you think there's a conspiracy there, you're automatically nuts. Means that guy doesn't even understand what the word means. Go ahead.
Yeah, but noticing in the 2 papers, in the American Journal of Medicine and then Reviews in Cardiovascular Medicine, the 2 treatment papers, there's, I think altogether close to 300 different references. Those references are there for a reason. So with hydroxychloroquine, there was a study by Makary and colleagues. It had 28,000 people in it. It wasn't that hydroxychloroquine was dismissed by anybody. It reduced the risk of hospitalization and death. There was a series of prospective randomized trials and a meta-analysis. I know because I published it. So he doesn't actually discuss any of the data. He tries to go to conspiracy. Listen, I was just reporting the news. When the hydroxychloroquine plant burned down outside of Taipei in 2020. I was just reporting the news. When France took hydroxychloroquine, which was over the counter, and then made a prescription and made it hard to get, I'm just reporting the news. When the FDA put emergency use authorization on hydroxychloroquine just for hospital use, and it turns out, its better use was outpatient, and then the FDA said don't use it at all. That's on the FDA website. I'm not making that up. When Rick Bright tried to block hydroxychloroquine from getting out of the stockpile, and Peter Navarro was trying to free it up, Peter Navarro called me. So that's like personal knowledge. It wasn't, again, I'm not making this stuff up.
I know you're not, but this guy is, and he's presenting his facts in such a shifty way. Well, they're not facts. Here we go.
And what they're doing is trying to set up an equivalency. Well, see, you could give this early hydroxychloroquine and prevent coming to the hospital, or you could late in the hospitalization, give a drug that's made by pharma, that's a repurposed, failed Ebola drug, remdesivir, and cat's already out of the bag. Viral replication's already happened. It's not going to help much, and it has liver and renal toxicity. Well, you know what? This is a area where I agree with Peter McCullough. I think remdesivir has been overblown. I don't think it does a lot. I do think it has some toxicity, but it is one of the things that we give because of some data, randomized data, in hospitalizations. Now, Vinay Prasad and I have both argued that it's not as effective as it's claimed to be. And it does have downside, and it's an infusion and all of that. Okay. So, but that really doesn't have relevance to hydroxychloroquine. So you can set this up as kind of like a thing and go, see, well, remdesivir sucks. Therefore, I'm right about these other things. Well, but that doesn't really make the argument, does it? Right? They're true, and not related.
So the point he just made was that when you say remdesivir doesn't work, and he agrees with you, doesn't work well, and he agrees with you. He says that you use that to go, see, that means hydroxychloroquine does work. That's not why you're saying it, is it?
No, those are separate topics. They're separate drugs, and he's complaining to. But listen, just to be sure, he goes, well, it has some toxicity. Paul Merrick, who's the father of critical care. Paul has over 500 publications in the National Library of Medicine. Testified in the U.S. Senate January 24th that his analysis of all the clinical trials of remdesivir results in more death than placebo. So it's not just my opinion,
right?
It's the opinion. And so, of course, people are turning down remdesivir now. They understand that they're more likely to die if they get remdesivir than if they don't.
But they can make a lot of money prescribing remdesivir. So,
conspiracy to stop hydroxychloroquine was happening. And this conspiracy was so that they could promote vaccination instead. Now, okay, again, you're relying on conspiracy, but then there's a second sign of misinformation here: fake experts. So he says, look at what Scott Atlas said, look what Dr. Pam Popper said, and look what Robert F. Kennedy Jr. said about this. All right, so who are these people? So Scott Atlas is a radiologist from the Hoover Institution here at Stanford who served on Trump's advisory committee. He's a radiologist. He has some expertise in policy. He's a very smart guy. I think he'll be proven to be right about a lot of the stuff he said, but he's not at all an expert on whether there's a conspiracy or not around hydroxychloroquine. Pam Popper is a naturopath, so not a medical doctor, who sells stuff around natural wellness and writes books about that stuff. So she's an expert on this. How? And Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is a lawyer, the son of Bobby Kennedy, and a longtime professional anti-vaccine activist. He has said things like the following.
So what he's doing there is not I caught what he did. So tell me if I'm wrong. What I think he did there was what you said, look at what they've said. You didn't say, look at their credentials. You said, look at what they've said. And he's not arguing what they've said. He's arguing that these people don't have any credentials, which if we're going to do a credential contest, you wouldn't even be worthy to do this video about Dr. McCullough. So what do you do?
He's not.
So
I'm
ahead.
not sure he's even read the books. He should just take a look at them. Pam Popper's got a PhD, and she published one of the first ones about COVID operations. She was just laying out the groundwork of how things fell into place, how the agencies work with one another. There aren't any incredible claims in that book. The book that really is the thickest, that's got the most references, is Peter Breggin, COVID-19 and the Global Presence. I know because I wrote the introduction. But then you also have Scott Atlas. Scott and I had dinner, and he introduced his book. His book basically is pointing out how the White House had talking points. You read Scott's book, it was clear they weren't going to entertain anything else outside of the vaccine, and they had talking points. And he's reporting on the White House task force. And then the last book is Robert F. Kennedy, and Robert F. Kennedy, has a book where he points out pretty clearly the conflict of interest and the intent of our National Allergy Immunology directors. So, it's a matter of reading the books, and just like he doesn't have any publications, I bet he doesn't read as well.
Okay. Let's keep going.
In order to write, you have to read. And if he doesn't have a track record in writing, he may not have a track record in reading.
Doesn't sound like he's read any of that stuff. I would bet $1 million he hasn't read RFK Jr.'s book. Okay.
Mr. Kennedy, are there any vaccines you think have ever had historical benefit? He says, I don't think I can answer that. He's been activist against childhood vaccines from the beginning.
Again, this isn't an argument. This is not an argument.
So that's what we call a fake expert.
This is what we call a bullshit argument, because you're not arguing any of the points that any of those people are making. You're just trying to get an ad hominem so you can dismiss their arguments without actually addressing their arguments. And even though you don't have any hair on your head, you still look like a shyster. Okay.
Well, yeah, and the thing is that authors are entitled to publish books and cite them. and people can read the books. And if Robert F. Kennedy has, legal credentials, that's fine. He takes that approach. Pam Popper has public health credentials. Peter Breggin, boy, he got big pharma credentials. And he wrote Talking Back to Prozac. He's probably one of the most cited experts in the courtroom of all time in medicine. Peter Breggin's very senior, and I've already given him my credentials, and this guy just doesn't have any credentials. He doesn't have any reading and writing credentials in science.
But he likes to discredit other people, which is hilarious to me. Let's see if he's got more to say.
An appeal to false authority. They are not authorities on this. So that's how you can you can just look at what Dr. McCullough is saying and go, okay, let me at least question this because he's doing this behavior, right? Now let's see. He then says,
Hang on.
Now let's see. He then says, he says, and the studies that there are all these observational studies that were favoring hydroxychloroquine, and then randomized control trials that were flawed that said it didn't work. Now, this is an example of what we call impossible expectations and moving goalposts. So there were two big trials, right? Randomized trials, Recovery and another one. And this is what happens. So Recovery says, hey, hydroxychloroquine doesn't have any benefit. So how does he move the goalpost? You didn't give it early enough. Okay. Then the next trial, randomized control trial, says, hey, we gave it early, it still doesn't work. Well, move the goalpost again. You didn't give it with zinc and azithromycin in a multi-drug cocktail. So of course it doesn't work. So it's endless. There's nothing you will do that will change his mind. They will never admit they're wrong, et cetera. And he hasn't, about anything. He's still talking about hydroxychloroquine. So these are examples of moving goalposts. Now he says, well, one of these trials, randomized trials, was fraudulent and was later retracted by the Lancet or BMJ or something like that. Now he said no one was talking about that. No one was talking. Why was no one talking about that? All right. So is that true? I did a video on it. Actually interviewed the head of Duke's clinical.
Because you did a video on it doesn't mean that anybody saw it or heard it, and it certainly wasn't reported in the mainstream press. I do a daily news show, and I'm focusing on COVID, and I didn't hear about that. So you're trying to, he's trying to pretend that everybody was talking about it. Nobody talked about that because the first time I heard about it was on this guy's freaking video. Okay.
Right. So what he's referring to is there are 5 small randomized trials, and there's only 2 of them that are placebo controlled. And even in those trials, they have an endpoint where the doctor gets to choose the endpoint. The doctor gets to decide how much oxygen the patient's on. Those are not valid trials. No one holds up. And not only that, but there's something called power. We have to have a large clinical trial to have a sufficient number of power in order to show that something doesn't work. See, the idea here is these small trials just lead to what's called type 2 error. They fail to find an effect when its need is there. So if you do a very small clinical trial, even though it's randomized, if it's very late in the disease course, people on the ventilator, they're 4 weeks into it, hydroxychloroquine doesn't have a chance to work. Actually, nothing else has a chance to work. That's the reason why mortality rates are so high and people go on the ventilator. And so if we pick that venue, that's a design to fail. Pick it too small, and then pick an endpoint that's not unbiased. Now we have doctors who are actually trying to choose it. Now, the trial he mentions is the recovery trial. The recovery trial was not blinded. So the doctors actually knew who got hydroxychloroquine, who didn't. And then they actually got to choose the endpoint of how much oxygen the patients needed. Well, I have to tell you, the randomized trials here are not trustworthy, and they tend to bias to the null hypothesis. In no way did those trials inform anybody of what to do on the very first day someone got COVID-19. So that's the reason why doctors basically ignored those inpatient trials and treated patients early with hydroxychloroquine.
Okay, let's move on.
Institute about it, the Surgisphere fraud, where there was this fake company created called Surgisphere run by this dude. Me and Vinay talked about it on our show, who fabricated data, and it ultimately showed hydroxychloroquine doesn't work, but it was caught by the medical establishment and retracted. That's good science. That's actually encouraging. And we not only did we talk about it at the time, it was all over the mainstream media.
Okay, no, it wasn't. He's just lying about that. That was not all. That wasn't anywhere. Again, every day I go on the news. I go on Twitter. I go on the Google. I go everywhere, and I'm looking for news about COVID. And I'm looking for and I've never heard this. So him to say it was reported everywhere, I don't know what he's talking about. Maybe it was on page 38 of the New York Times, but maybe it was. But I didn't. Go ahead.
But for him to say this is good science,
yeah.
Oh my gosh. Jimmy, I've been an editor for 20 years. This guy isn't even close to being, on the copy room floor. I mean, that's good science. Forget it. You've got 2 to 4 reviewers. You've got an associate editor, an editor. You have so many opportunities to check a paper. I can tell you a fraudulent paper would never get past me. The fact that a fraudulent paper gets past all these levels of checks, gets into Gallup, gets fully published by Lancet, and it's up there for 2 weeks, and then they pull it down. That's good science. Are you kidding? Good science is actually rejecting that paper at the editorial submission stage. That's good science. You can tell this person has never been a scientist. He's never been an author. He's never been an associate editor and editor. So he wouldn't know the process. He doesn't know. And he's misleading his audience. It's really shameful.
I know. He's constantly, this is one big propaganda video. And of course it got 700,000 views.
It's just also, it's reflective of incompetence, right? So you would never say that a paper that's published in Lancet and up for 2 weeks and taken as medical truth being pulled down as good science. You would never characterize it that way. That's called a major embarrassment. That's called a major lapse.
So he turned it on its head. He turned a big mess up, screw up, embarrassment that people should have lost their jobs for. And he said, no, that's how science works. That's good science. Even I knew he was full of it. I'm like, oh my God, this guy is so bad at this. But he does it. He has that, Dr. Collins from the NIH. They have that I'm a nice guy persona. You can trust me. I'm a nice guy. And they're lying the whole time. So here, let's keep going.
So this is it's incorrect, the claim he's saying nobody was talking about it. Now, you can start to detect the bias here. This was the hill he wanted to die on early on, is hydroxychloroquine. He believes in it. And I think he has good intent. I actually think I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt and saying he saw it anecdotally work in his patients, but of course, anecdotes are tough. He believed in it from first principles. He studies cardiorenal disease and he has a certain bias towards prevention and these kind of things. Wonderful. That's wonderful. But when data comes out that challenges your bias and belief, you're supposed to challenge your own bias and belief, but most humans don't do that, and he's no exception. Instead, he's entrenched and doubled down and moving goalposts, relying on conspiracies now to explain why no one's listening to him.
So, you just already explained that away, what he just said. Why those tests were flawed, and in fact, the one of them that was published for 2 weeks in the Lancet actually had to be taken down because it was garbage science. So I don't know what he's talking about. Do you want to say?
But he also said no one's listening to me. Hydroxychloroquine has been the most widely used drug for treating COVID-19 in the world since the onset of the pandemic. So you can see that he doesn't have any type of grounding. He actually doesn't even know what's going on. We had an expert like this in the U.S. Senate in November of 2020, a media doctor, and Senator Johnson knew it. And Senator Johnson waited about 2 hours into it. And finally he said, "Doctor, have you ever treated a COVID patient? Have you ever seen one?" That would be the question you would want to answer. You want to ask him and his sidekick, and then say, "Listen, if you strongly believe hydroxychloroquine doesn't work, why don't you tell me what does?"
Yeah.
And what did you use in the first year of the pandemic, doctor? He's an internal medicine guy. He says he's pretty highly ranked at these institutions. They were flooded with COVID. What did he do with his outpatients? That would be the question to ask. Because he's never stated it, I can tell you what he did.
What?
He did nothing.
Nothing.
He did nothing.
Exactly. That's what my personal doctor told me that they were doing at the hospital. She said they don't know what they're doing and they're not doing anything. If you come and you say you're sick, they'll send you home and come back when your lips turn blue, and then we'll just put you on a ventilator. That's what they were doing. So here,
listen. Listen. On the way home, I got a call. My wife was driving. A doctor from Arkansas, out in the country. He said, "Listen, I got a tough patient. I want to go over it with you." A very cordial call. He goes, "I've treated 2,000 patients." Well, let me tell you, that country doctor in Arkansas has got clinical experience. What I didn't hear this doctor say is that he treated 2,000 patients. I didn't hear him say he treated one.
That's right. I haven't heard that either. Okay, let's keep going. This is fun.
Relying on conspiracies now to explain why no one's listening to him. And just fabrications, like everybody was talking about the Certosphere controversy. So, and the idea was, again, he's saying it's because they were saying, forget about drugs. Now that we think a vaccine is possible, this is all we want to do. Who this we is, I don't quite fully understand because.
You don't know who this we is. He goes, I don't know who this we is. You don't know who the we is? The we is would be Dr. Fauci It would be Dr. Collins at the NIH. It would be Big Pharma, and then everybody in the media that they own, and then everybody in the research clinics at all the universities that Dr. Fauci funds. That would be the we. So I know you don't know what it is, but a dumb pothead comedian in his garage knows what it is, and you're not embarrassed by it. Go ahead.
Well, Jimmy, let me tell you, you know, besides holding one of the first investigational drug applications, I got a big grant. I was studying COVID-19. I was the principal lead on the Romatroban program, which is an innovative product from Japan that Bayer held. And I was in a series of negotiations with the FDA and the NIH in Operation Warp Speed. I was also the second supporting lead for the Modulon program, which was a cell-based vaccine program. So I spent the spring and the summer on calls with the Operation Warp Speed people. And I am telling you from firsthand experience, their minds were made up that it was going to be Pfizer, Moderna, J&J, and they weren't going to hear about any additional therapeutics or vaccines. So I'm just telling you, I had firsthand knowledge of this.
I know you do, and he has no knowledge. Okay, here we go. But wait, my favorite one's coming. My favorite BS line of his is going to come. Hold on.
The fundamental misunderstanding here is that pharma can somehow make more money from vaccines than they can from therapeutics. When in the history of pharma has that been true? Vaccines have often lost pharmaceuticals money.
So he's now going to make the argument that Pfizer and Moderna aren't making any money off these vaccines, and they would much rather if ivermectin and hydrochloroquine was prescribed and they worked because they would make more money off those. Now, you and I both know that's unbelievable garbage. Let's play a little bit. But look, he keeps going. Watch.
They're not a huge profit center.
They're not.
Compared to therapeutics. So monoclonal antibodies, remdesivir, molnupiravir, these kind of things, these are cash cow potentials for pharma. Why would they push a vaccine that it wasn't clear it was even going to work early on when they could easily spin up a ton of different therapeutics, right? So there's a real problem there. And then it's from the conspiracy standpoint, well, there's a conspiracy multinationally to squelch therapy. Well, that's not true because in many countries they did do therapy. And the other thing is, how do you even coordinate that? Like, who's doing that? That's really hard. We can't even, because there's.
Well, it'd be the WHO, which Bill Gates funds. What are you talking about? This guy acts like he doesn't know anything. Again, I'm in my garage and I know this.
I think he's somehow in dreamland on the word conspiracy since he mentioned it so much.
Yes.
You know, there's been a transcript that came out with me and Rogan, a transcript. And you know what the most frequently utilized word that we used? Monoclonal antibodies, then early treatment. You know, there was none of this stuff he's talking about. I mean, so he's way off base. But let me just say that that a drug that's considered a blockbuster drug would earn about $1 billion in its first year, and they spend multi-billions in their own. They use their own money to develop a drug, multiple $1 billion, and they spend about half of the sales on this, half of the revenue on Salesforce. But that's $1 billion. Pfizer in its first year, and in several sources can source this for you, is at, I believe, 33 billion.
Here it is. Here it is. I'll show you. Pfizer expects $33.5 billion in vaccine revenue in 2021. Moderna says it doesn't intend to profit from its COVID vaccine, yet estimates in 2021 revenue will be up 22 times higher than in 2010, and Moderna's stock is up 230% from last year. So this idea that there's not a lot of money to be made in these vaccines is a blatant lie. And I don't know if he hit his head before he did this video, because if he didn't, he's a liar. There's no two ways around. The guy's not getting it wrong.
Well, listen, the former FDA commissioner who presided during this pharmaceutical aspect of COVID-19 is Stephen Hahn. He joined the venture capital firm for Moderna. Before that, Scott Gottlieb.
That's right.
He joins the board of Pfizer. Now he's advising America on vaccines. The conflict of interest and the money at stake is in the open.
It's right out in the open. You don't have to look for it. Everybody knows. I guess he's not aware of this. I guess he doesn't know about this. This guy's a joke. But he's a joke for the establishment, which is why Google and YouTube are pushing his video and why I have to take it down or debunk it, because it's got over 750,000 views already. So a lot of people see this guy and he seems earnest, but that's what a good liar does. They seem earnest, not like a jagoff like me.
Well, listen, if under 1 million people have seen him go through this, honestly, by December 27th, I had 40 million views with Rogan. Most
That's right.
people watched all 3 hours. And now, ever since the Spotify blowback and Neil Young and what have you,
Even more.
is even more. So.
Yeah. All right, so let's go a little. Let's keep going. I mean, so what people have, the reason why I'm doing this, Doctor, is because people give me a hard time when I'll bring on like Dr. Malone or Dr. Yo Ganda or someone else, and they'll say, "Why don't you push back on them more?" And I'm like, well, because the whole entire establishment is pushing back on them, and I want to give them enough time to make their case. Well, so I'm doing this with you because this is so ridiculous. And this is the kind of debunking that the establishment media thinks is great.
What he's showing is he's not qualified. Because the first thing when someone has a lot of publications, the first thing they do is they become very respectful to the other person who has a lot of publications. And you can tell he's just outright disrespectful because he doesn't actually even know what he would need to respect or not respect.
Correct. I think this is my last clip of him. Let's see.
Let me say one thing. This vaccine bias, right, that he's claiming, and the ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, early madness has created a bias now. Because now when a therapeutic comes out that has good randomized control data, like say fluvoxamine, which is a repurposed SSRI antidepressant, nobody's talking about it. It barely gets a lot of media mention. It gets some. We've talked about it, but nobody's jumping up and down about a 30% reduction in hospitalization in the randomized trial. That's a pretty well-designed trial. And I think that is one of the downstream effects of people like Peter McCullough dying on this hill of hydroxychloroquine, honestly. Now, real therapeutics that could prevent some admissions, even if it's small, use it with a bunch of other stuff, with vaccination, with molnupiravir and other therapeutics that are coming out potentially if they show promise. Now people aren't talking about it. So this is a downside of this kind of misinformation.
So he's saying that no one's talking about fluvoxamine or other therapeutics because you pushed hydroxychloroquine. I don't know what kind of logic that is. It's zero logic. But
I'm the one who initially created the multi-drug protocol. It's now copyrighted, the McCullough protocol. It was always 4 to 6 drugs. It never died on any hill of any drug. In fact, I did a seminar with Dr. Chetty from South Africa, who innovated. He learned how to treat this with no hydroxychloroquine, no ivermectin. I think I have more publications on ivermectin than I do on hydroxychloroquine. And I use fluvoxamine all the time in my practice. Fluvoxamine was in the second paper. Or fluvoxamine received mention actually in the treatment guide, not in the second paper. But the randomized trials in general will show a 70% benefit for ivermectin, about 30% for fluvoxamine, about 25% for hydroxychloroquine. For the monoclonal antibodies, which we talked about the most, it's an 85% reduction in hospitalization. That's what we talked about at most. This guy's pretty far into it, and he's not even mentioning what Rogan and I talked about the most, which is monoclonal antibodies.
And he's pretending like if you say that they're limiting monoclonals, that you're some kind of nut, conspiracy, tinfoil hat, crazy person, which we all know. The government admits that they're limiting monoclonals, you knucklehead.
But Jimmy, the question is, for this young man, what would motivate him to do this? Why wouldn't he want to kind of do his own research or go out and treat some COVID patients or go write a great analysis and publish it in New England Journal of Medicine? What would make him want to spend? It looks like he probably spent a lot of time. In fact, I think the most frequently used word, since the most frequently used word Joe and I was monoclonal antibodies, I think the most frequently used word he used was conspiracy. Yeah.
Yes, that's it. That's all he's got. And let's remember the CIA demonized the word conspiracy and pushed it out after the assassination of JFK to make anybody who questioned their narrative seem like a crazy person. And so now that's why when they wanted to push a conspiracy theory called Russiagate, they call it collusion because they had already demonized that word so much. Mm-hmm. And that's why collusion. Why do they keep saying that? That's why. And so why does he keep saying conspiracy at the top of his lung every third word? Because this guy isn't on the up and up. Something's doesn't pass the smell test. What this guy's doing. You're right. Why doesn't he go write a paper? Why doesn't he go treat some patients and write a paper about that? Why doesn't he do anything? He's not doing any of that. But he is getting 700,000 views on a video that just somehow gets pushed through the algorithm. That's just a mystery how that happened, I guess. Okay, so I won't play any more of this guy because I got sick of
Right.
him.
Well, with COVID-19, the use of the word conspiracy or conspiracy theory by people like him just doesn't serve the public. It's not useful. All I was doing is just citing the data. I published the papers for a reason. I have 54 publications in COVID-19. He has zero. And, and that's the only thing I can do is I can just publish the science and publish the concepts and keep putting my best foot forward as an academic doctor. That's what I do. But I think what America really got a chance to see, Jimmy, is they got to see actually two extremes of a spectrum. There is a spectrum of medicine that is fringe. It's not supported by science, and it just doesn't really have any role. It should be off the airway. He should be off the airway, and we should just be focusing on science. That's the reason why I'm on the major news every night, which I will be tonight, because I give expert commentary that's cited in the data. He's not material for the nightly news. He's not going to be Senate material.
No, can I ask you? I want to ask you this to clear this up, because when Dr. Robert Malone came on our show, so the focus of my show is to get people to, if they're going to be angry over COVID, be angry at the oligarchy that still hasn't given us health care, right? We're still two years into a pandemic. They haven't added an ICU bed, but they will blame you for getting sick and clogging up the ICU beds. But they don't blame anybody else. They don't blame the obese who won't stop eating donuts. They won't blame the diabetics who won't stop eating candy. They won't blame the alcoholics who won't stop drinking, or the smokers. They won't blame the reckless drivers who get in car accidents, or the rock climbers, they don't blame anybody else for clogging up beds except people who catch a certain virus. And let's remember, in 2018, every hospital from coast to coast were treating flu patients in tents because they were overwhelmed with the regular flu. So I'm trying to get people to not blame their neighbor, because that's what the establishment and guys like this want you to do. They want you to get angry at your neighbor because they didn't get vaccinated. But that has nothing to do with this. As Dr. Robert Malone explained, you can't vaccinate your way out of this pandemic. If everybody got vaccinated, you're still going to have corona, correct?
Sure. I mean, paper by Singarajam and colleagues in Lancet, 39% of all transmission is fully vaccinated to fully vaccinated. That's a huge chunk of transmission. So if everybody took the vaccine, which they did in a lot of countries, there Camp and the last one by Beatty, all showing the more you vaccinate, the worse it gets. There's more cases and there's greater mortality. All I do, unlike this junior doctor, is I cite the data, because I read the studies, Jimmy, and then I cite them. And obviously I can recall them because I read them. And if you noticed, he actually didn't cite a single paper. He didn't know the first author of a single paper through his entire.
I did notice that. I did notice that he didn't cite a single paper. Well, I want to thank you so much for coming on. You've been really generous with your time. I appreciate your expertise. I appreciate you coming on here to set the record straight so people could see that you're actually an unbelievably qualified doctor who follows the data, does the reading, does the research, and treats patients on the front lines, unlike your critics. So, what have you been invited?
Well, I
go ahead.
I have to say one thing though. The good thing about what this young doctor did, and Neil Young and Prince Harry and everything, when you go on the internet, people are saying, that blowback that's going on with Rogan, I never listen to Rogan anymore, but I went ahead and got an account and I downloaded it, and I really wanted to hear what Dr. McCullough said. All they did is actually create more listens and more viewers. And what I told Rogan was no different than what I told Tucker Carlson and everything else. That and I didn't have the heart to tell Rogan, but actually the biggest audience I've ever had was Daystar, and I've done Daystar twice, the largest Christian broadcasting network, where there's just well over 100 million.
Oh, no kidding! I've never even heard of Daystar.
Daystar. That's paid subscriptions in all these countries all over the world. They're huge. So Daystar was a big international, and I did it twice, and they did reruns. I'm going to go on again, and so the audience is large, and the message is getting through. At some point in time, I wonder what people like him will actually do. In the end, do they say they're sorry, or do they just say, oh, I knew this all along, that we should treat this all along, or what do they say about the vaccines in the end? With, after so many thousands of deaths, will they say, oh, well, I kind of knew they were bad, but I didn't say anything? Or I'm just curious how people are going to walk themselves out of this, because you can see someone like him and the person he mentioned, I think is Prasad, would have, these guys are deep into it. All the CNN commentators are deep. It's interesting. You know who called me today? Want to talk to me? ABC. They
No
want to
kidding.
fly. I said, terrific. I'll talk to you. Listen, I'm a middle of the road voter. I'm not a hardcore right winger. I've just been given the science for the last 2 years. You're going to see in the end, what happens in science, there's always a service of justice. It may be years later, but it happened with the Nazi war crimes. It's happened with all these horrific things. The very first doctor who put a patient on the iron lung for polio was thrown off staff and ridiculed and belittled, just like this guy tried to do to me. Same thing happened with the first doctor who washed his hands after delivering a baby.
Yep.
It's the history is replete with this, of how people go out of their way to discredit and injure somebody who's actually trying to bring an innovation forward. And you can see he went out of his way. He went out of his way to try to injure me as I'm bringing forward an innovative concept. Me and others, it's not just me, but the fact that we can treat COVID-19 and that we're cautious on vaccine safety and efficacy.
Now, there's been no news agency has been more on the front lines of criticizing people like you and Joe Rogan and anything that veers from the cult-like narrative of COVID, even though it's been proven to be wrong over and over. When Dr. Fauci was proven to lie about masks, he lied about herd immunity. He lied about gain of function and funding it and where the virus came from. And if you said the virus came from a gain of function research in a lab, you'd have been kicked off YouTube and Twitter. People were. And so, again, he keeps throwing conspiracy around, but every one of them turns out to be true. And they're not conspiracy. They're just theories about what is happening. And they all happen to be, just turns out that every single one of them happen to be true. Isn't that weird? Now, so CNN has been on the forefront of criticizing Joe Rogan and you. And they even equated Joe Rogan with January 6th. I'm not kidding. So, and they had to pull that headline down. They did yesterday. But has Dr. Sanjay Gupta or Anderson Cooper or any of those guys at CNN invited you on their show?
No, they haven't. And I'd love to come on. I have to tell you something really interesting. I was on Newsmax with Mercedes Schlapp the other night, and she had a story about the FDA delaying the vaccines for children under 5.
Yes.
And she goes, I have to tell you, as a mother, she goes, of young children, I really breathed a sigh of relief that, we don't have this this menace for our children. She didn't say it that far, but you can tell she was relieved at the decision. This morning, I was listening to CNN, and Breonna Taylor said, and as a mother, I'm so disappointed. I know so many other mothers are disappointed we don't have these vaccines to get into our children. And so if you could actually take those 2 clips, Jimmy, you could do it. Take the 2 clips and juxtapose them. I'll send you the
I will.
Mercedes. Juxtapose them. It is so interesting how the media portray. And the truth may be that people are agnostic or they really don't care. But the fact that one mother said she's relieved she doesn't have this, menace on her children, and the other one is frustrated that she can't get these injections soon enough for her children. It is interesting.
Well, I know that there is a lot of vaccine hesitancy in parents for their children because they've made available for 5 to 11-year-olds, but 3/4 of those kids are not vaccinated. So the parents aren't vaccinating those kids. And guess what? Those kids don't need a vaccination. They have less of a risk from COVID than they do from the flu.
Yeah.
So
Jimmy, one other observation. Since you saw the DC, the rally against the mandates in Washington, D.C.,
Yes.
the Canadian truckers, and all these European protests, Jimmy, where's the counter protest? Where's the millions of people out there saying, we believe in these vaccines, take the vaccines, they're good for you. In fact, I spoke on the Lincoln Memorial, and I specifically was listening for any hecklers. There were no hecklers. There's not a single person out there saying that really believes you should take a vaccine. I mean, like I said, Steve Kirsch is offering $2 million on the table. If any doctor, including this doctor here, would come to the table and just support these vaccines in a roundtable, he'd pay him $2 million. This guy won't show up.
So now, so the Great Barrington Declaration said what Dr. Malone said when he came on this show. Do you subscribe to that same theory that we should vaccinate the vulnerable, the elderly, the people with comorbidities, and maybe the obese, but healthy people we shouldn't? Is that where you're at?
Well, don't forget the history of this is that I published the first pathophysiologic basis paper in August of 2020. That was the big landmark. That was the first paper that says we can treat COVID. Period. In the whole literature, it's 55,000 papers. The Great Barrington was about a month or two later, and that was Jay Bhattacharya, Martin from Stanford, Martin Kulldorff from Harvard, and Sunita Gupta from Oxford. And they basically said, listen, we're looking at all this. They had about 6 months to analyze it. They said, don't lock down, none of these draconian measures, just protect the seniors. And it was before the vaccines. And they said, listen, if we have a safe and effective vaccine, then just use it in the seniors. And I was tweeting about that time. I estimated maybe 2.7 million, 3 million people in the United States, nursing home residents, workers, congregate settings, high-risk seniors. And if a safe and effective vaccine would have been just rolled out for our seniors, we would have, accomplished it. So I fully subscribe to the Great Barrington Declaration. And you can see how, in the end, Jay Bhattacharya, by the way, I'm going to be on Fox with him tonight on our panel with Laura Ingraham. You can see how he's the nicest guy in the world, how he's been overtly attacked by our,
Yeah, I've seen it. We had him on this show here. He's fantastic. He seems, unbelievably earnest. He's like you, relies on the data, does the reading, does the treatment, the whole thing. So, well, is there anything that you wished I'd asked you? I didn't, because we got to wrap it up. I know you have to go. So go ahead.
I think it was a terrific review. The main thing is, this person, to just put a cap on it, I think in his mind he is trying to do good, and I think most people out there are trying to do good. Scott Atlas believes the same. Scott Atlas's book says he thinks people do have good intentions, but we have such a range of competency, and we have such a unique challenge being the virus, that so many people, they just can't navigate the data, just can't navigate the concepts, and they just quickly get into a viewpoint or talking point, and they just stick to it the entire way. So in this person's mind, he was going to discredit anything about early treatment, anything at all. In the end, he never came up with anything. In the end, should we use any drug to treat patients early? And the answer is no. At the U.S. Senate, the minority witness, he kept saying, you don't have enough evidence. You don't have enough evidence. You just can't treat people early. You can't treat people early. In fact, when I published the paper in the American Journal of Medicine, I think there was something like 6 letters to the editor, and they came from Duke. They came from McGill, Monash, Europe, South America. And the general tone of the letter would be something like his. So listen, you can't do this. You can't treat people early. And I said, my letters back were so much fun. I'd say, overcome your fear, overcome your bias towards therapeutic nihilism. Let's try to help these people. Let's try to help people. And what you didn't see in this person, in this whole exercise, is you didn't see his intent to try to want to help people. Let's help people get through the illness. It's what I've called a crisis of compassion.
Dr. Peter McCullough, thank you very much for coming on. I really appreciate your expertise. Everybody, what's your Twitter? We'll put it up so people can follow you on Twitter.
Yeah, so it's P_McCullough, MCCULLOUGH
Okay.
And I'm following rules very carefully on Twitter, and so far I'm surviving. So.
Okay, and don't blame your neighbor. Keep your eye on the establishment, the oligarchy. Those are the people who are misleading and lying to you for profit.
I just try to help people. That's all I've done, Jimmy. I've just tried to do it in my own personal practice. I've tried to do it through my publications and my commentary. I want to end this thing. This has been 2 years. Let's finish it.
And how long do you think before everybody gets on the same page with this and we realize it's an endemic?
I originally said 3 to 5 years. We're on year 3 right now. And it's not biologically driven. I think it's actually the mind. It's how the mind is thinking. I think it's 3 to 5 years. I just don't know how. I'm really worried about the doctors. I don't know how they come back to this. because the body count of death after vaccination, all the injuries. We're at 1,000 papers in the peer-reviewed literature and preprint system on vaccine injuries. I mean, it's just the literature is overwhelming. At some point in time, what do they say? Do they say, well, sorry, or I didn't realize, or what do they actually say? And so I'm really worried about the doctors, because I just can't imagine being on the wrong side of something that's been so catastrophic as this.
Okay. I welcome you back. You're welcome back anytime. We've got lots more questions for you, a lot more things to talk about. So if you ever have time, let us know. Thank you for taking time out, and we'll see you next time.
Okay, see you then.
Hey, we're doing live stand-up comedy in Philadelphia on February 20th. We just added a second show. And February 26th, back here in Los Angeles, go to jimmydoorecomedy.com for a link for all the tickets for all our live shows.